ചില കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറയാൻ വേണ്ടി നമുക്ക് ഈ കഥാപാത്രങ്ങളുടെ പേരുകൾ പറയേണ്ടി വരും. അതുകൊണ്ട് ആ പേരുകൾ ഞാൻ സൂചിപ്പിച്ചെന്നേ ഉള്ളൂ. ഇനി നോവലിലെ വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട മറ്റൊരു കഥാപാത്രം യാക്കോബാണ്. യാക്കോബ് ഞാനിവിടെ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, പള്ളിയിലച്ചൻ ഒരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രമായിട്ട് നോവൽ മാറുന്നത് ആ പള്ളിയിലച്ചന്റെ പ്രതിയോഗിയായിട്ടോ പ്രതിദ്വന്ദ്വമായിട്ടോ നമുക്ക് അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്നത് യാക്കോബിനെയാണ്. യാക്കോബ് മുമ്പോട്ട് വയ്ക്കുന്ന ആശയം ഈ പള്ളിയിലച്ചൻ മുമ്പോട്ട് വയ്ക്കുന്ന ആശയത്തിൽ നിന്ന് വിരുദ്ധമായിട്ടുള്ള ആശയമാണ്. അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് നമുക്ക് പറയാം. മറ്റൊരാള് പീറ്റർ, പോസ്റ്റ്മാൻ പീറ്റർ ആണ്. പീറ്ററും നോവലിൽ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രമാണ്. വേറൊരാൾ ഐസക്. ഐസക് അങ്ങനെ വലിയ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രമൊന്നുമല്ല, എങ്കിലും ഒരു ചാരായക്കട നടത്തുന്ന മനുഷ്യൻ നിലയിൽ മാത്രം നമ്മൾ പരിചയിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു മനുഷ്യനാണ് ഐസക്. വേറൊരാള് ലോഹിതാക്ഷൻ എന്ന ബാർബറാണ്. നേരത്തെ സൂചിപ്പിച്ചു, ലോഹിതാക്ഷൻ എന്ന ബാർബർ വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രമാണ്. നോവലിന്റെ ആശയവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിൽക്കുമ്പോൾ വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഒരു കഥാപാത്രമായിട്ട് ഈ ലോഹിതാക്ഷൻ എന്ന ബാർബർ മാറുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇനി ഒരു കുടുംബത്തെ കുറിച്ച് കൂടി പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് നമുക്ക് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കാം. ആ കുടുംബം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ജോഷിയുടെ കുടുംബമാണ്. ജോഷിയുടെ കുടുംബം എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് യോഹന്നാന്റെ കൂടെ സ്കൂളിൽ പഠിക്കുന്ന അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സ്കൂളിലേക്ക് ഇടക്കാലത്ത് വെച്ച് നിന്ന് ചേരുകയും യോഹന്നാൻ വളരെയധികം സ്നേഹം തോന്നുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു കഥാപാത്രമാണ് ജോഷി എന്ന കഥാപാത്രം. യോഹന്നാന്റെ പ്രായത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു കുട്ടിയാണ്. ആ ജോഷിയുടെ കുടുംബം, ദാനിയൽ എന്നാണ് അച്ഛന്റെ പേര്, എസ്തർ എന്നാണ് അമ്മയുടെ പേര്, ആഗ്നസ്, സൂസൻ, വത്സമ്മ തുടങ്ങിയിട്ടുള്ള സഹോദരിമാരുമുണ്ട്. അതിൽ ആഗ്നസും സൂസനും വത്സമ്മയും ഒന്നും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ആൾക്കാരോ നോവലിന്റെ പ്രമേയത്തിൽ ഒരു പ്രാധാന്യമുള്ള ആൾക്കാരോ ഒന്നുമല്ല. ജോഷിയുടെ സഹോദരിമാർ എന്ന നിലയിൽ മാത്രമേ ഇത് ശ്രദ്ധിക്കപ്പെടുന്നുള്ളൂ. എസ്തറും ദാനിയലും ജോഷിയുടെ മാതാപിതാക്കൾ എന്നതിനോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ ദൈവഭക്തിയുള്ള വളരെ വിശുദ്ധരായിട്ടൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് അനുഭവപ്പെടുന്ന സ്നേഹമുള്ള രണ്ട് ആൾക്കാരായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് പരിഗണിക്കാവുന്നതാണ് ദാനിയലിനെയും എസ്തറിനെയും. നേരത്തെ സാമൂൽ മാഷിനെയും റോസമ്മയും പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള പള്ളിയുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് ജീവിക്കുന്ന, വിശ്വാസങ്ങളെ മുറുകെ പിടിക്കുന്ന, മറ്റുള്ള ആൾക്കാർക്ക് യാതൊരു പ്രശ്നങ്ങളും സൃഷ്ടിക്കാത്ത വളരെ മനോഹരമായിട്ടുള്ള ജീവിതം നയിക്കുന്ന രണ്ടുപേർ നടത്തത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് ദാനിയലിനെയും എസ്തറിനെയും പരിചയപ്പെടാം. ഇത്രയും പേരാണ് ഈ നോവലിന്റെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രങ്ങൾ. ഇനി നോവലിന്റെ കഥയിലേക്ക് എത്തുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് അവിടെ പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും നോവലിനെ പിന്നെ പാപസങ്കല്പത്തിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിലാണ് നമുക്ക് വ്യാഖ്യാനിക്കാൻ പറ്റുക. പാപബോധം എന്നൊരു വാക്ക് നോവലിൽ നിരന്തരമായിട്ട് ആവർത്തിക്കുന്ന വാക്കാണ് പാപം എന്നൊരു വാക്ക്. ആ പാപത്തിന്റെ ഇരുപുറം നിർത്തിയിട്ടാണ് ഇതിൽ ഓരോ കഥാപാത്രങ്ങളുടെയും പ്രവർത്തികളെയും ആ പ്രവർത്തികളുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട അവരുടെ മനസ്സിലുള്ള വിചാരങ്ങളെയും നമുക്ക് ചർച്ച ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വരുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ നമുക്കറിയാം, മനുഷ്യജീവിതം പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും മൂർത്തമെന്നും അമൂർത്തമെന്നും നമുക്ക് രണ്ടായിട്ട് തിരിക്കാൻ പറ്റും. മൂർത്തമെന്നും അമൂർത്തമെന്നും നമ്മുടെ അനുഭവങ്ങളുടെയും അനുഭൂതികളുടെയും ഒക്കെ ഒരു സങ്കരമായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ ഈ ജീവിതത്തിൽ കാണുന്നത് മൂർത്തമായിട്ടുള്ള അവസ്ഥകളുടെയും അമൂർത്തമായിട്ടുള്ള അവസ്ഥകളുടെയും അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിലാണ്. മൂർത്തം എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഭൗതികമായിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളാണ്. നമ്മുടെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ നടത്തുന്ന ഭൗതികമായിട്ടുള്ള ഇടപെടലുകൾ, ഭൗതിക ആവശ്യങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത്തരം ഭൗതിക ജീവിതവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടോ നമ്മൾ നടത്തുന്ന ഇടപെടലുകളെയും വ്യവഹാരങ്ങളെയും നമ്മുടെ ജീവിതത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് കാണാം. അതേസമയം തന്നെ ഭൗതികേതരമായ ജീവിതവും ഇപ്പോ വിശ്വാസവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന, സങ്കല്പങ്ങളുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന, നമ്മുടെ പേടിയുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന, അപ്പൊ നമ്മൾ പേടിക്കുന്ന ചില കാര്യങ്ങൾ, നമ്മൾ ഭയപ്പെടുന്ന അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ വിശ്വസിക്കുന്ന ചില കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ നമ്മുടെ ജീവിതത്തിലുണ്ട്. ഇതിനൊക്കെ ഭൗതിക ജീവിതത്തിൽ എത്രത്തോളം പ്രാധാന്യമുണ്ട് എന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പൂർണ്ണമായ അർത്ഥത്തിലൊന്നും പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു സംഭവം ഉണ്ടോന്നും നമുക്ക് അറിയില്ല. അപ്പൊ ആ ഒരു പ്രശ്നമുണ്ട്. ആ രണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങളും കൂടെ ചേർന്നതാണ് മനുഷ്യന്റെ ജീവിതം. ഇപ്പോ ഉടലിന്റെ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ, ആത്മാവിന്റെ അനുഭൂതികൾ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഉടലിന്റെ പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങളെ നിയന്ത്രിക്കുന്നത്, മാനസികമായിട്ടുള്ള ചിന്തകൾ, ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള പല കാര്യങ്ങളും നമുക്ക് ഇതുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് പറയാൻ പറ്റും. ഉടലിന്റെ അനുഭൂതികളുമുണ്ട്, മനസ്സിന്റെ അനുഭൂതികളും നമുക്കുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പോ നമുക്കറിയാലോ, നമ്മുടെ കുട്ടിക്കാലം തൊട്ടേ കേൾക്കുന്ന ചില വാക്കുകളും ചില
colonies all over the world. But perhaps the only successful resistance in which a non-European power defeated a European power in their colonial aspirations was, what was it? What was that event that I referred to just now? The first event in which a non-European power defeated a European power. Do you know which one or who did it? I mean, never, not American. Yeah, right. Kulachal War. In Kulachal War, our army, our Travancore army defeated the Dutch in Kulachal War. So that was the first successful resistance to European colonization. So our hero, Marthandavarma Maharaja, defeated the Dutch in the Kolachal War of 1741. 1741, I think. So at Kolachal, the Dutch were defeated by the Travancore army, and again, what happened was that the Travancore soldiers, defeated the Dutch and arrested the Dutch captain, and he was brought back to Padmanapuram Palace, Marthandavarma's palace. Do you know the name of that captain, Dutch captain, arrested by the Travancore forces? Yes, Captain Delanoy. Captain Delanoy. He was arrested and he was taken to the palace, and there Marthandavarma Maharaja offered two options to Captain Delanoy, either to end up in the presence of Travancore or to join the Travancore army. So these were the two options given to Captain Delanoy, and he chose the second one, and yes, he was appointed as the Valiya Kapitan of the Travancore army, the Valiya Kapitan of Travancore army. And he then built several fortresses for the king, and one was the Vattakottai. Vattakottai was built by Captain Delanoy, and then another Anjudangakota. So these were again built by Captain Delanoy for Travancore. So this was perhaps the first successful resistance to European colonization, where a European power was defeated by a non-European power. And Captain Delanoy was buried here, I think in the Anjudanga fortress. And there is another, information. Do you know, later Captain Delanoy's grandson or great-grandson became very famous later. Do you know who he is? Captain Delanoy's grandson. Our great-grandson. It was the American president Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt. And so later, again, yes, Udayagiri Fort. So right, so it was one of the landmarks in colonial history. And about this incident, once Winston Churchill said, "Thank God it was not Britain." So this was Winston Churchill's comment. Thank God it was not Britain. So that means it was Dutch who were defeated and not Britain. So this was the first phase of European imperialism, where the European powers established colonies all over the world. And now, by the end of the 19th century, British colonies were like this. They had colonies all over the world. Thus, British imperialism reached its peak in the 19th century, that is during the reign of Queen Victoria. And so British empire became the empire where the sun never sets. The empire where the sun never sets. So you can see that colored portions here in the map. All are British colonies. So this is the greatest extent of the British Empire that reached its peak in the 19th century. And then, so that was the first phase of modern imperialism. And later, the second phase started in the mid-19th century. The second phase started in the mid-19th century and lasted till the First World War. That is from mid-19th to the First World War. That is the second major phase in the history of imperialism. And what happened during this period? So there was scramble of imperialistic power, which means the Europeans themselves fought for imperial possessions. They fought among themselves for imperial possessions. An example was the Boer War between Britain and the Dutch settlers in Africa. So thus, there was the Boer War. Then a lot of other wars were there between the European powers, between French and English, between the Dutch and the English and the like. So this was actually the second phase. The second phase in the history of European imperialism, the scramble of imperialistic power between European powers, European nations. And the third phase is what is called the post-colonial phase. What happens is that the imperialistic, that means several colonies got independence. So that means after the Second World War, during and after the Second World War, so imperialism came to its end. So that means a kind of political imperialism came to its end. And then okay. So imperialism came to its end and several colonies became free, including India. So the colonies became free, but at the same time, the imperialist strategy survived in altered forms. That's why I told you that only the political phase of imperialism came to an end in the third phase. But its legacies, cultural, political, sociological legacies are there in the erstwhile colonies. And that is what is special about the third phase. So these are the third phase. The first phase between 1492 and mid-18th century, where European colonies were established. And the second phase is between mid-19th century and First World War, where there was a scramble of imperialistic powers between European powers. And then another is the third phase, which is during and after the Second World War, where imperialistic strategies survive in altered forms. So that means several colonies became politically free, but still the legacies of oppression and colonialism can be, seen in the erstwhile colonies. So these are the three phases in modern imperialism. And now, what are the motives of imperialism? So what are the motives of imperialism? There are mainly three motives of imperialism. Three motives. One is the economic motive. What is the economic motive of imperialism? That is to amass wealth. To amass wealth. That is the economic motive. So that the colonizers can become immensely rich. So that is the economic, motive of colonization. They can become immensely rich. And this is really what happened. And I told you, India was perhaps the richest nation of the time. So many spices were there here. A lot of precious things were there in India. And the most precious gem of the world, which is it? Most precious gem of the world. That is the Kohinoor. The Kohinoor. So that stone, Kohinoor stone. And so it was again our, possession. It was actually our legacy, our possession. And some people said that it was again the same thing as Syamandagam in our mythology. Syamandagam in my mythology, whatever it is. So we had the possession of that, the most precious gem of the world, the Kohinoor. And it was actually the home of so many riches, like the Peacock Throne and a lot of such things. And our temples were very wealthy. There was gold stones in our in our country. And so naturally there were so many colorful stories about India among the Europeans. And so they and again the thing was that we were actually subjected to a lot of plundering expeditions. Plundering, several people plundered our country, including the Afghans. Muhammad Ghazni, Muhammad Ghori, Nadir Shah. So these people came to India and plundered our wealth, captured our wealth. And the Kohinoor was again captured from the Afghans by the British. And do you know where it is now? The Kohinoor. It is in the British Crown. The Kohinoor is now in the British Crown. And so they plundered our wealth, and they actually use the same technique everywhere in the world. And thus they became immensely rich. And Britain had colonies all over the world, not only India, but she had colonies all over the world. And from all these colonies, raw materials and spices were actually taken to Britain almost free of cost. So Britain became immensely rich. And that was one of the motives of imperialism, that is getting wealth, amassing wealth, so that their country can become financially safe. Then the second one is social Darwinism. What is social Darwinism? Darwin had actually used that had introduced that famous dictum, survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. And so here, the advocates of social Darwinism supported imperialism. How? Because colonialism is a struggle for survival. Colonization is a struggle for survival. And in this struggle, only the fittest will survive. So this is a struggle for survival. And in this struggle, only the fittest will survive. And that was actually social Darwinism. and nothing wrong about that. So this was what Darwin said in his theory of evolution. In the theory of natural selection, he said that only the fittest will survive in the world. And so they used the same, method here. And then the supporters of imperialism said that this is a struggle for survival. And anybody can participate in this struggle, but only the fittest will survive. So this is how colonization was justified. But the thing was that we did not. I mean, the Indians did not do this had not done this to any other nation in the world. But at the same time, in the ancient age, we had colonies. But not colonies, but part of the empire, part of the Indian empire. But unfortunately, that part of the history was rather eclipsed and obscured. And the Indian history is perhaps the most manipulated history in the world, with so many hidden items. Have you heard of Rajendra Chola? A Chola with my name. He was a great conqueror indeed. He had conquered a lot of lands. The Chola kings of Tamil Nadu, they annexed a lot of kingdoms in the world. Rajendra Chola was also called Gangaikonda Cholan because he had reached even the Indo-Gangetic plain. Then he extended his empire over Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Cambodia, Singapore. All these were part of his empire. Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia. So these were part of that ancient Indian empire. So that was why still we can see the relics of Indian culture or ancient Hindu culture in all these countries. But somehow that part of the history was not taught at schools and colleges. We were taught at schools and colleges only the history of our servitude, our servile nature, how we became slaves by the slaves of the Afghans and how we became the slaves of the British and the Europeans and the like. This was what we had been taught at schools and colleges. So here, now let us come back to our topic. So social Darwinism was a principle where colonization and imperialism was justified with that statement, survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. And the third imperialist motive was moral responsibility. Moral responsibility. They believed that it was their moral responsibility to educate the uncivilized, the uncouth people of the colonies. So this was another ground on which colonization was justified. Because the Europeans considered themselves as highly, developed, highly progressive. They were the only civilized race in the world, and this was what they thought. And they considered all other people, the Indians, the Arabs, the Africans, the Red Indians, and all the Australian Aborigines. All these people were considered as uncouth, uncivilized, uncultured people. And then they thought that it was their responsibility to bring them to the fruits of civilization. This was what they thought. So they justified colonization on this ground, that it was their moral responsibility to, make them civilized. That is why they colonized their land. See how, ironical the comment is. So that is why the poet Rudyard Kipling wrote the poem "The White Man's Burden." The white man's burden. What is the white man's burden? So see, in the cartoon you can see the white man's burden. He is carrying a native, an indigenous, person to school or to the church. For what? For getting educated. So that is, what I mean, they consider as the white man's burden. It was their burden to educate the uneducated, uncivilized people of the colonies. And this is how, again, colonization was justified. And do you know, Rudyard Kipling was born and brought up in India. His parents were in the colonial service. He was born and brought up in India. And he had a very carefree childhood here in India till the age of 5. So he had, I told you, a very carefree childhood here in India till 5. And both his parents were very busy. So they were very busy and they could not actually attend the child. But the child was well looked after by the Indian servants. The child was well looked after by the Indian servants. And the Indians' attitude to children. So that's very interesting indeed. And that too, they are to the child of the colonial master. So then the affection and love will multiply. So he was pampered by the Indian servants. But at the age of 5, his parents decided him to send to England. Otherwise, the child would become an uncouth, a savage like the Indians. So they decided to send the child to England for better education. So then they sent Rudyard Kipling to England. And there the boy felt like a fish out of water. And he was actually entrusted with the care of a pious, Orthodox Christian couple there in England. He was brought up there. At first, it was very difficult for him to cope with the new reality. But years passed. Children have greater adaptive skills. So within a few years, he became a completely English boy. And he realized that he was an Englishman, an English person. And then he began to despise everything non-English, everything Indian. And then it dawned upon him that to recover his Englishness, he had to shake off his Indianness. This was what he did. To recover his Englishness, he wanted to shake off his Indianness. And the rest of his life was characterized by a pursuit to shake off whatever is left in him as Indian and to recover his Englishness. It was in one such endeavor, that is, endeavor to shake off his Indianness and recover his Englishness, that he wrote that famous book, The Jungle Book. The Jungle Book. See, what is the story of The Jungle Book? It is a story of a human child. The story of a human child brought up by a fraternity of animals. Brought up by a fraternity of animals. Then, is it clear now who the human child is and who are the animal world represented in the Jungle Book? So in Mowgli, he is actually portraying himself. He is the human child brought up by a fraternity of animals. And who are the animals? Definitely the Indian servants. See that the selection of names is also very significant in that story, Jungle Book. So what is the name of the villain? What is the villain of the book, Jungle Book? Sher Khan. Sher Khan, the tiger, is the villain of the piece. So that name is very important. Sher Khan is an Afghan name. An Afghan as another to the Indian. So this was actually the the agenda, the thematic agenda in the story. So this is what he did in the Jungle Book. But so remember, here we can again see another the instance of another person, almost similar to that of Rudyard Kipling. It was none other than Sri Aurobindo, Aurobindo Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo, Maharshi Sri Aurobindo. And his life was almost similar to that of Rudyard Kipling. Here, Aurobindo Ghosh was born as the son of a Bengali doctor. And what is special about his father, that Bengali doctor, was that he was an Anglophile and an ardent admirer of the British culture and the English language. He was an ardent admirer of the British culture, an admirer of the English language. He despised everything Indian. And he banned Bengali and all other Indian languages at home. And the children were permitted to use only English at their house. So because of that, their poor mother could not communicate with them. That poor lady did not know English, so she was not permitted to talk to her sons. And then, when Aurobindo and his elder brother, became old enough to be sent to school, what did his father do? He sent both the boys to England to be brought up there. And he had an acquaintance there, an English couple. And he sent these two boys to that English couple. And he agreed to pay a certain amount per month for them to look after the two children, to train them in English ways, in British culture. Thus, Aurobindo and his elder brother were sent to England. They were actually brought up as English boys. And their father strictly gave the instruction to the English couple that the children should not be trained in any religion. The children should not be trained in any religion. But fearing damnation, the English couple secretly took the boys to the church and performed the baptism. And later, years passed and the father died. When the English couple stopped receiving money from India, they sent the boys back to India. And after a few years, Aurobindo and his brother, Aurobindo Ghosh and his brother returned to India. And back in India, Aurobindo Ghosh discovered that he was basically an Indian, fundamentally an Indian. And he said that to recover his Indianness, he wanted to shake off his Englishness. This was what he did. To recover his Englishness, to recover his Indianness, he wanted to shake off his Englishness. The rest of his life was characterized by that kind of a search for the Indianness. He devoted his time to the study of Indian Upanishads, Vedas, and the like. And he voraciously read a lot of such things, Indian philosophy. And he finally became a Maharshi, a sannyasi, a Maharshi. So that means the opposite process here. That is the just opposite to that of Rudyard Kipling. So thus, a lot of such things can be seen in the history of colonization. Okay. Now, shall we have a short break? Okay, 5 minutes break, and after 5 minutes, I shall. Okay, are you following me? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, we shall meet after 5 minutes. Okay, shall we start? No. See, now we shall come to the term, the post-colonial. So what is the post-colonial? Now, the Australian post-colonial theorist Bill Ashcroft used the term post-colonial to cover all the culture affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present day. All the culture affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present day. So from this definition, we can see that post-colonialism is different from colonialism, because the post-colonial refers to the cultural legacies left by the colonial rule. The cultural legacies left by the colonial rule, or the cultural implications left by the colonial rule. And so here, as a critical practice, what are the aims of post-colonial criticism? What are the aims of post-colonial criticism? One is to re-examine the history of colonialism from the perspective of the colonized. So that is the first aim of post-colonial criticism, to re-examine to re-examine the history of colonialism from the perspective of the colonized. So there are so many histories, world histories. But we can see that world history is always, or has always been, European history. What is projected as world history, or what is taught as world history, is definitely the history of the Europeans. And the history of colonialism has also been written from the perspective of the colonizer, from the perspective of the colonizer. And no history has been recorded from the perspective of the colonized. So how the Europeans became successful in their, conquest of the other nations and the like. This was actually the theme of world history. There were elaborate accounts of American colonization, how the Spaniards fought against the indigenous people, how they fought against the hostile nature, and how they became successful in establishing their colonies, how they became successful in practicing their religion there. And all these were the avenues explored in world history. But to counter that sort of history, there should be a history written from the perspective of the colonized. A history written from the perspective of the colonized. How the colonized people were affected by European colonization and the like. So thus we have to re-examine the history of colonialism. How from the perspective of the colonized. Because history has always recorded colonialism from the perspective of the colonizer. And another aim of post-colonial criticism is to determine the economic, political, cultural impact of colonialism on both sides. So that means colonialism is not actually a single process. It is not a monolithic procedure. On the other hand, it is multifaceted with multiplicity of meanings, effects, and the like. So that means it has economic, political, and cultural impacts. And that means these impacts are felt not only on the side of the colonized, but also on the side of the colonizer also. But sometimes there is a tendency to see such impacts on the colonized, the impact of colonialism on the colonized. No, that's not fair, because the impacts could be felt on the colonizer also. The colonizer could be influenced by the colonized. The colonizer could be influenced by the colonized. So this can be seen in the Indian freedom struggle. The British attitude to Indians and the like. And what is most unique about our freedom struggle is is definitely non-violent agitation. Non-violent agitation. So that is perhaps the most unique aspect of our freedom struggle. So that means ours is perhaps the only country who got independence through what is called satyagraha, or non-violent measures, ahimsa, or non-violent measures. Why? Because our culture is different. And the British people had a superiority complex. They were not like other European countries. The British people believed that they were the most civilized people of the world. They were the most civilized and cultured people of the world. This was what they thought about themselves, the most cultured and civilized people of the world. But when they came to India, it was a very, sometimes it was very shocking to them. 1 minute. 1 minute. Check. Okay, so that is how and when they reached India, when the British came to India, so they were really, surprised at, seeing something quite different from other colonies in India. So that is something different in India. Why? Because here they have, here they witnessed a group of people who are morally, ethically, and even socially superior to them. Morally and ethically and philosophically superior to them. So that is actually that is something related to the psychology of the Indian freedom struggle. So this was how the ahimsa measures, non-violent measures, became successful in Indian freedom struggle. Because in India, philosophically speaking, in India, they saw three essence, sattvam, satta or sattvam, sattagal, that is what's called essence. The three sattvams are Purushatvam, Naritvam, Kleebatvam. Purushatvam, Naritvam, Kleebatvam. Purushatvam, Naritvam, Kleebatvam. So what is meant by Purushatvam? Purushatvam is definitely masculinity. Masculinity. Naritvam is femininity. And then what is Kleebatvam? Kleebatvam is definitely something they actually had not watched elsewhere in the world. That is the androgyne, the in-between. Kleba, the androgyne, the in-between. Or, in other words, napumsakatvam. Napumsakatvam. ഈ ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ ഐഡന്റിറ്റി എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന സംഭവം വെസ്റ്റിൽ ചിന്തിക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങുന്നത് ഇപ്പോഴാണ്, കുറച്ച് നാളെ ആയിട്ടുള്ളൂ. വെസ്റ്റേൺ ഫിലോസഫിയിൽ ട്രാൻസ്ജെൻഡർ ഐഡന്റിറ്റിക്ക് ഒരു സ്ഥാനം ഉണ്ടായിട്ടില്ല പണ്ടത്തെ കാലം. But now, when they came to India, they saw something altogether different from, other cultures. So here we have three kinds of sattvas: Purushatvam, Naritvam, and Kleebatvam. So we always reserved a space for them, the third gender, in philosophy and in mythology. We had such characters in our mythology, like Shikhandi, Brihannala. So these are, the transgender characters in our mythology. And we had a space for them. But that is not our point. That's not our point. So I told you, there are three sattvas, Purushattvam, Nayatvam, and Klibhatvam. And now take Purushattvam. And what is Purushattvam or masculinity? How did the Westerners define masculinity? The Westerners' concept of masculinity is that it is aggressive, violent, adventurous. So this is how they defined masculinity. Their masculinity is always adventurous, violent, aggressive, and the like. But in India, what astonished them was that, curiously enough, there are still two forms of masculinity in India. Two forms of masculinity in India. So what was that? Which are the two forms of masculinity? One is the Brahmanical masculinity or the ascetic masculinity. And the other is the Kshatriya masculinity or the aggressive masculinity. So these were the two kinds of masculinity. And Western concept of masculinity is always like the Kshatriya masculinity of India. That is the aggressive masculinity of India. Violent, adventurous, and aggressive. That is the Kshatriya masculinity, which is almost similar to the Westerners' concept of masculinity. But what about the other? Ascetic masculinity. What is special about ascetic masculinity? What is ascetic masculinity? The Brahmanical masculinity or the ascetic. So this does not, mean that it is the, property of the Brahmins or something. Not. It's not like that. It's ascetic masculinity. What is ascetic masculinity? The masculinity of an ascetic, the sannyasi. The sannyasi is least bothered about the body. To him, the body does not exist. So we cannot inflict physical torture on him because he is least bothered about the body. So, സന്യാസിക്ക് ഒരു അടി കൊടുക്കാമെങ്കിൽ സന്യാസി പറയും അടിച്ചോ കുഴപ്പമില്ല, എന്നാലും ഞാൻ മാറത്തില്ല, അടിച്ചോളൂ കുഴപ്പമില്ല, I am ready to bear all these things. You can kill me. Okay, you can kill me. If you want to kill me, you can kill me. But I will not change. To say so, one must have enormous moral and ethical strength. The strength of the mind. അത്രയ്ക്ക് മനസാന്നിധ്യമുള്ളവർക്ക് അത് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. എത്രയൊക്കെ കൊടിയ പീഡനങ്ങൾ ഏറ്റാൽ അതൊക്കെ ഏറ്റുവാങ്ങിയിട്ട് ഞാൻ മാറില്ല എന്ന് ഉറക്കെ പറയണമെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അത് അവർക്ക് മാത്രമേ പറ്റൂ. And that is the ascetic masculinity. എന്ത് വേണമെങ്കിലും എന്നെ ചെയ്തു, പക്ഷെ ഞാൻ തിരിച്ചൊന്നും ചെയ്യത്തുമില്ല. So this was actually what is called the ascetic masculinity. And in Indian freedom struggle, we can see both the traditions. You got it? In the activities of Bhagat Singh, we can see the aggressive Kshatriya masculinity. Bhagat Singh, Gangadhar Tilak, so they were those extremists in the Indian freedom struggle. They are practicing what is called the aggressive masculinity, the Kshatriya masculinity. But what about Gandhi? Gandhiji's masculinity is different from them. That is what is called the ascetic masculinity. And it is because of this ascetic masculinity that he was able to resist the European power. He fought against the British Empire with his moral strength. That is quite unique. Definitely it is quite unique. You got the idea? So, both traditions can be seen in the Indian freedom struggle. The ascetic masculinity, as we can see in the person of Mahatma Gandhi, and aggressive masculinity, as we can see in the person of Subhash Chandra Bose or Bhagat Singh or Tilak. And then what happened is that I told you the English people had a superiority complex, and they believed that they were the most superior race of the world, and they were morally and ethically superior to all people of the world. This was what they thought. And in that case, they could not use force against the ascetic masculinity. They could not use force against ascetic masculinity. So this was how we succeeded in implementing ahimsa or non-violent measures of agitation. So had he arose in revolt against them with arms, they could have easily suppressed, the mighty British army could have easily suppressed our freedom struggle. They would have easily drenched the freedom struggle in blood. But they could not use force against a group of non-violent protesters. So that was the thing. And remember, when General Dyer opened fire against the mob in Jallianwala Bagh, it was actually a peaceful mob. When he opened fire against the people in Jallianwala Bagh, several people died. And what happened in Britain after that? So an average Englishman's consciousness revolted against this, conscience revolted against this. And there were stormy and violent scenes in the British Parliament against this. And so this was how they became helpless in dealing with our freedom struggle. So this is actually definitely an impact on colonization or colonialism on the colonizer, an impact of colonialism on the colonizer. And now another aim of post-colonial criticism is to analyze the process of decolonization. To analyze the process of decolonization. Thereby and so decolonization means to get rid of the colonial legacies. That's what's called a decolonization, to get rid of the colonial legacies. So as part of decolonization, several African writers abandoned their European names and accepted their, real names. And remember, many of the Africans had the name Albert attached to their name. Who is Albert? Who is Albert? മിക്ക ആഫ്രിക്കക്കാരുടെയും പേരിന്റെ കൊടുത്തിട്ട് ആൽബർട്ട് കാണും. സാധാരണഗതിയിൽ ഈ ക്രിസ്ത്യൻ പേരുടെ അച്ഛന്റെ അപ്പൂപ്പന്റെ ഒക്കെ പേരെടുക്കുമല്ലോ. പക്ഷെ ഇവർക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും ആൽബർട്ട് കാണും അന്ന്. Why? Who is Albert? Albert was the husband of Queen Victoria. So several, abandoned that name. Thus, Albert Chinua Lumogu Achebe abandoned his name and accepted the name Chinua Achebe. It's part of a kind of decolonization. And then the fourth aim of post-colonial criticism is to participate in the goals of political liberation. To participate in the goals of political liberation. That is the fourth major aim of post-colonial criticism. Okay. And now, the first major theorist of post-colonialism was the Algerian psychiatrist, an Algerian psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon. He was an Algerian psychiatrist. He was born in 1925 and he died in 1961. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Somebody please respond. Okay, there is a power failure here, that's why. I want to know whether the connection was lost or not. Okay. Yes, Frantz Fanon was the first major theorist of post-colonialism. He was a psychiatrist by profession. And being a psychiatrist, he had first-hand knowledge about the psychological impact of colonization on the colonized. And he was born in 1925 and died in 1961. And Frantz Fanon's most important contribution is the book, The Wretched of the Earth. This is his most important contribution, The Wretched of the Earth. The Wretched of the Earth. It was published in 1963. The Wretched of the Earth, 1963. And this book, that is after his death, published after his death. So this book, that means that the original was in French. That was published in 1961 itself. The translation published in 1963. And this book analyzed the conditions and requirements of an effective anti-colonial revolution. An effective anti-colonial revolution. From that too, from a Marxist perspective. So this is the first major book in post-colonial theory. And now we need to be familiar with the two important chapters of this book. One is the pitfalls of national consciousness. The pitfalls of national consciousness. So here he criticized what is called a national consciousness. He criticized what is called a national consciousness in the colonies. So what is meant by national consciousness? So that means after independence, several colonies developed nationalist sentiments. Nationalist sentiments were developed after independence in the colonies. Okay. And then nationalist sentiments later proved to be an empty shell, according to Frantz Fanon. Why? So that why did he consider nationalist sentiments as an empty shell? Because after independence, in most of the colonies, the bourgeoisie became powerful. The bourgeoisie became the power center. That means after independence, power was transferred from the European masters to the bourgeoisie of the colonies. Bourgeoisie, the middle class people, the educated middle class of the people. And they are called the bourgeoisie. And again, the bourgeoisie of the colonies were different from the bourgeoisie of the European countries. The bourgeoisie of the colonies were different from the bourgeoisie of the colonies. How or why? Because in the colonies or in the European countries, the bourgeoisie evolved after Industrial Revolution. The bourgeoisie evolved in the European countries after Industrial Revolution. because Industrial Revolution was a very important socio-economic event that had completely reconfigured the social structure of Europe. Up to the Industrial Revolution, agriculture was the mode of production in Europe. Agriculture was the mode of production in Europe. And again, agriculture always supported the feudalistic class, because agriculture was the source of money or source of income to the feudalistic class, because the feudalists were landowners and agriculture was their source of income. So the feudalists amassed immense land, and so they controlled the society, they controlled the state. So aristocracy was all the more powerful during the pre-industrial society. But what happened after industrialization? Industrialization totally reconfigured all these things. And after industrialization, a new class of people emerged, an economically powerful class of people emerged. They are called the bourgeoisie. So they are a group of people who had little money with them, and with that money, they would actually start a business or an industry. And within no time, they could become rich. So this new group of people who are economically powerful emerged in the colonies. Sorry, in the European countries, Sorry, not in the colonies, in the Europe. We are speaking about the European countries. And they posed a threat to the aristocratic people, I mean the feudalists. And within a few years, the feudalist class lost its power, economic power, and the like. And they were replaced by the bourgeoisie class. So thus, the bourgeois class became very powerful in Europe. And definitely they were agents of change. Even Karl Marx admired them. Even Karl Marx admired the bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie were agents of, the European bourgeoisie were agents of change. They questioned the existing system of feudalism, and then they emerged as a new class of people, and they transferred power from the feudalists to the ordinary people, and thus they were agents of change according to Marx. And that was the European bourgeoisie. But the bourgeoisie of the colonies were not like that. They were totally different. Why? Because they are a group of people, economically powerful group of people in the colonies, who could afford European education and European cultural artifacts. And so they were, in many cases, children from the middle class families in the colonies were sent to England for education. During the British rule, it was quite easy for the Indians to go and study in England, because no need of visa or something like that, because it is part of the British Empire. So if you have money, you can definitely go and study in England. So the newly emerged bourgeois class in the colonies were conditioned by Western training, European training and European education. So naturally, in their outlook, in their sensibilities, and in their attitudes, they are exactly like their colonial masters. So their attitudes to their own people, their attitude to the society, all were exactly like that of the European masters. So that is why Frantz Fanon said that the nationalist sentiments proved to be an empty shell. Because after independence, there developed a kind of nationalist sentiment or nationalism in all the colonies. But these nationalist sentiments were evidently the sentiments of the bourgeois class. And the sentiments of the bourgeois class of the country were projected as the national sentiments. And then they implemented the same methods which had been implemented by their colonial masters in the country. So that means independence became useless to the colonized people. Independence became useless to the majority of the colonized people because there was no considerable change in the society. There was only a power change, a power transfer, that is from the white masters to the non-white bourgeoisie of the country. So that means the colonized people even had greater oppression under the rule of the bourgeois class who came to power after independence. So that is why he said that nationalist sentiments proved to be an empty shell. And so rapid steps should be taken from the national consciousness to social and political needs. So that is what Fanon said in his The Pitfalls of National Consciousness. And then another chapter is on national culture. So nation is definitely a necessary condition for culture. That is in the context of colonial domination. So what is culture then? So it is the expression of national consciousness. Culture becomes the expression of national consciousness. And now, what is actually the difference between nation and country? What is the difference between a country and a nation? A country and a nation. What's the difference? The country is a geographical reality. The country is a geographical reality, an area marked by physical boundaries. That is the country. But the nation is something abstract, something psychological, a sense of belongingness. So that is what's called a nation. It is abstract. It is a kind of belongingness. And nation, the concept of nation evolved during colonization. Because the European colonizers went to different parts of the world. They went to different parts of the world, and there they started living. That is, they started living in the colonies or the places where they reached. And then, while living in a foreign land and thinking about their own country, they developed a kind of belongingness, a psychological feeling of belongingness to that particular country, their home country. And that feeling became what is called a nation. That meaning later came to be called nation. So that is actually the meaning of nation. So nation is different from the country because the country is a geographical area, whereas the nation is a psychological sense of belongingness. And so what happens in the colonies is that culture develops, a new sort of culture develops. That culture is definitely the expression of national consciousness. And again, we have to say, whose consciousness is national consciousness? The consciousness of the bourgeoisie. So this is how the culture of the colonies was shaped according to the whims and fancies of the bourgeois class. So this is what Frantz Fanon said in his famous books, The Rest of the Earth. And now, the next major theorist, post-colonial theorist, was Edward Said. He was a Palestinian, but later he became a citizen of the United States, and he was born in 1935 and died in 2004. And his most important contribution is the book Orientalism in 1978. And no, I'm not going to discuss that book because we have to study the introduction to Orientalism, which is prescribed in our syllabus. And in the next class, we shall definitely we shall deal with Orientalism. So for the time being, I'm skipping this. And now, another major post-colonial theorist was Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. And now, Spivak, as the name indicates, is an Indian and a person of Indian origin, but later became, a French citizen. I think now she is in India, and she was born in 1942. Still alive, And Spivak's most important, and what is special about Spivak is that it was she who translated Derrida's of grammatology into English. That is from French to English. It was she who translated Derrida's of grammatology into English. And her most important contribution is this work, Can the Subaltern Speak? It was an article written in 1983. Can the subaltern speak? So what is meant by the subaltern? What is meant by the subaltern? So that is the question. What is meant by the subaltern? Subaltern is a term maybe first introduced by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci. Grimsci. Gramsci. Grimsci. Antonio Gramsci. It was he who first introduced the term subaltern. And the subaltern originally means an inferior officer in the army. An inferior officer in the army. So here, Spivak introduced the term subaltern to refer to the colonized non-elite. The colonized non-elite. So that is the meaning of the word subaltern in Spivak. The colonized non-elite. So what is meant by the colonized non-elite? So in the colonies, so I told you that after independence in the colonies, power became vested with the bourgeois class, which means there were other groups of people in the same colonies who had been denied freedom and power. And they were the non-elite sections of the society in the colonies. So subaltern here means the non-elite sections of the colonies. In India, it may mean the Dalits and the tribals and such people. And those people were termed as the subaltern. And so the subaltern refers to the colonized, the non-elite sections of the society. And then, so what is told in this work, that is, Can the Subaltern Speak? is actually centered around a story. The story of a Bengali woman called Bhuvaneshwari Baduri. Bhuvaneshwari Baduri. And she was a Bengali girl. And she was associated with some revolutionary organizations. So she was associated with some revolutionary organizations like the Naxalbari or something like that. And once she was given a task, it was to assassinate a political leader. But somehow she failed in her mission. But the mandate is that if a person fails in his mission, he has no right to live. He should kill himself. So this is the mandate. So Bhuvaneshwari Baduri had to commit suicide because she failed in her mission. And then what she did was that she committed suicide just by hanging. But when she chose the time of her periods to commit the suicide, see, she chose the time of her periods to commit the suicide. Why? Because she wanted to communicate something to the people. What was it? In India, especially in the case of a lower class woman, or if a woman belonging to a lower class commits suicide or any woman commits suicide in India, the society's first response would be that she might be pregnant. She might be betrayed by some man. She might be pregnant. നമ്മൾ പെട്ടെന്ന് പറയും അവളെ ആരോ പിഴപ്പിച്ചതാണ്, അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് അവള് ആത്മഹത്യ ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വന്നതെന്ന് പറയും. ഏത് പെണ്ണ് ആത്മഹത്യ ചെയ്താലും പെട്ടെന്നുള്ളൊരു കൺക്ലൂഷൻ അതായിരിക്കും. അങ്ങനെയൊന്നും ഉണ്ടാകാതിരിക്കാനും താൻ പ്രഗ്നന്റ് അല്ല എന്ന് അറിയിക്കാനും വേണ്ടിയാണ് she chose the time of her periods for her suicide. And then months passed, years passed. Later, Spivak, the writer Spivak, met the two nieces of Bhuvaneshwari Baduri. Both of them were now employed in a multinational company. Both of them were employed in a multinational company. And then Spivak asked them about their aunt. And they they again began to talk about their aunt. And in the midst, they told Spivak that poor aunt, she was betrayed by a man. She had an affair. She was betrayed by a man. So she committed suicide. See how miserably Bhuvaneshwari Baduri failed to communicate that idea. So it is in this context she asked the question, can the subaltern speak? Okay. So this is an important contribution by Spivak. And then another term introduced by Spivak is strategic essentialism. So strategic essentialism means a kind of strategy whereby the marginalized sections of the people of the society, the ethnic minorities or such minority groups and such oppressed sections of the society can stand together. That is, for the time forgetting their differences to gain certain particular goals, to achieve certain goals. And this is what is called a strategic essentialism. So it can be a strategy which can be adopted by minorities ethnic groups or other oppressed sections of a society to gain political goals or something like that. That's what's called a strategic essentialism. And then another major theorist of post-colonialism was Homi K. Bhabha. Homi K. Bhabha. He was another major post-colonial theorist. He was born in 1949. You should not confuse him with the atomic scientist Bhabha. He is different. So Homi K. Bhabha was a theorist, post-colonial theorist, born in 1949. And Bhabha introduced certain concepts. The first one is hybridity. It is a concept introduced by Homi K. Bhabha. Hybridity. He is best remembered for his concept like hybridity. So what's hybridity? You know, hybridity is a term borrowed from horticulture. It's a term borrowed from horticulture. It refers to the crossbreeding of two species. It refers to the crossbreeding of two species. That's what's called a hybridity. The crossbreeding of two species. That's what's called a hybridity in horticulture. But here in post-colonial theory, hybridity refers to the creation of new transcultural forms. Transcultural forms within the contact zone and produced by colonization. Transcultural forms within the contact zone produced by colonization. So what does it mean? Transcultural forms. Hybridity refers to transcultural forms within the contact zone produced by colonization. Transcultural forms. So that means within a particular contact zone within colonization, two cultures can exist together, or two cultures can mingle and mix together to form a new form of culture, carrying the features of both cultures. And this can be considered as hybridity. Hybridity. And again, I shall make it clear definitely. So another concept is there related to this. Third space of enunciation. So what is third space of enunciation? See, this is third space of enunciation. There is another third space, that is symbol third space. Simply speaking, third space without any adjectives or something like that. And that third space was something associated with the postmodern geographer Edward Soja. And in last year or so, there was a question in the UGC NET examination about third space. Who introduced the third space? And that was introduced by Edward Soja. This is the third space of enunciation introduced by Homi K. Bhabha. So what is third space of enunciation? See, to understand it in a very easy way, imagine a space occupied by the colonizer, an abstract space occupied by the colonizer. Then another space occupied by the colonized. Okay. And now, when put together, there can be a third space where elements from both the first space and the second space meet and mingle together. So there can be a first space occupied by the colonizer. There can be a second space occupied by the colonized. And there can be a third space of enunciation where both the colonizer and the colonized can exist together. That means the cultures of the colonizer and the colonized can exist together. And that is what's called a third space of enunciation. What we can see in the third space of enunciation is hybridity. Because a hybrid culture consisting of the salient features of both the colonizer and the colonized. And that is what's called a hybridity. So we can say that we are actually a hybrid culture. We are again belonging to a hybrid culture. നമ്മളൊക്കെ ഒരു ഹൈബ്രിഡ് കൾച്ചറിന്റെ പാർട്ടാണ്. Our dress, our dress code, the items that we use, definitely European, but in person and our attitudes we are Indian. And this is what is called a hybridity. We are part of a hybrid culture. കോളനൈസർ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് നമ്മൾ അയാളെ ശത്രുവായിട്ട് കണ്ട് അയാളുടെ കയ്യിലുള്ള എല്ലാം നമ്മൾക്ക് വേണ്ടാന്ന് പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് അയാളെ ഓടിച്ചുവിടാൻ പറ്റത്തില്ല. ബിക്കോസ് there are so many positives in the colonizer. So we can accept what is positive in the colonizer. And at the same time, we can reject what is actually negative in the colonizer. Colonizer has a lot of qualities, positive aspects, definitely. So we can accept them. And then we can refine our own culture with the cultural forms of the colonizer. Then we can create a hybrid culture consisting of both the important features of the colonized culture and the colonizer culture. And this is what is called a hybridity. Hope you understood it. And then another term introduced by Bhabha is ambivalence. Ambivalence. So what is ambivalence? Ambivalence is a psychological term. Ambivalence is a psychological term. Ambivalence means loving and hating a person at the same time. That is ambivalence in psychology. Loving and hating a person at the same time. So that is what's called ambivalence. So that means in post-colonialism, there can be a kind of ambivalence, an ambivalent attitudes towards the colonizer. So we can love something in him, and at the same time we hate them too because they oppressed us. So this kind of an attitude towards the colonizer is what is called ambivalence. എം മുകുന്ദന്റെ മയ്യഴിപ്പുഴയുടെ തീരങ്ങളൊക്കെ വായിക്കുമ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലാകാം അവിടുത്തെ ആളുകൾക്ക് ഫ്രഞ്ചുകാരോടുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരു സ്നേഹവും ആരാധനയും. അവരങ്ങനെ സ്നേഹിച്ചിരുന്നു അവരുടെ കൊളോണിയൽ മാസ്റ്റേഴ്സിനെ. അപ്പോൾ ഒരേ സമയത്ത് അവരോട് സ്നേഹവും ആരാധനയും തോന്നും, അതേ സമയത്ത് എന്താണ് അവരോട് ദേഷ്യവും വെറുപ്പും തോന്നും. And this kind of an attitude towards the colonizer, that means that kind of a fluctuating relation within that exists within the colonial subject is what is called ambivalence. Now, 1 minute. എങ്ങനെ പോകുന്നു? എന്നെ വിളിച്ചോ? അച്ഛനും ഉണ്ടോ? ഓക്കെ, ഇന്ന് പോയിട്ടോ, വിളിക്കണം. So it is the complicity and resistance towards the colonizer, and that's what's called ambivalence. That's another concept introduced by Homi K. Bhabha. And again, so they are the major theorists of post-colonialism, and there are creative writers as well, like Chinua Achebe, the African writer Achebe, born in 1930 and died in 2013, the Nigerian writer. And so what he did was that he successfully, countered the colonial claims of Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness. And Achebe's most important contribution is the book Things Fall Apart. And again, Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness, is somewhat guilty of colonial, attitudes, because the title itself is suggestive, Heart of Darkness. Which is the heart of darkness? So Africa is portrayed here as the heart of darkness. Africans are like the children of darkness, and Africa is the heart of darkness. So this is how he portrayed Africa in his novel. But Achebe resisted this. He said that, no, there is no darkness in Africa. There is no darkness in Africa. Darkness is in the heart of the Europeans. Darkness is in the heart of the Europeans. No darkness in Africa, but darkness is in the heart of the Europeans. This is what Achebe said. And then another writer was Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was again instrumental in introducing the term decolonization, decolonizing the mind of the colonized. And so they had made substantial contribution to post-colonial literature, not theory, post-colonial literature, with their creative writings. And now there are some terms that you have to be familiar with. One is abrogation. What is abrogation? And in colonies, in the SY colonies, there is a process of abrogation. Abrogation means a rejection of standard English. A rejection of standard English. So that means that some post-colonists believe that there is no standard English. And whatever is considered as standard English is actually the English of the Europeans. And we reject that kind of an English. So the rejection of a standard English is what is called an abrogation. ഒരു പോസ്റ്റ് കൊളോണിയൽ പ്രൊഫസർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹം മനഃപൂർവ്വം ലുക്ക്ഡ്, കുക്ക്ഡ് എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുമായിരുന്നു. എന്നിട്ട് പറയും സോറി ഫോർ മൈ ഡീകോളനൈസ്ഡ് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് എന്നും പറയും. എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണെന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് പാർട്ട് ഓഫ് എ റിജക്ഷൻ ഓഫ് വാട്ട് ഈസ് കൺസിഡർഡ് ആസ് സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ്. That process is what's called an abrogation. Then the opposite process is what is called appropriation. Appropriation means it is the adaptation of standard English. The adaptation of standard English is what is called appropriation. Both tendencies can be seen in post-colonial theory. And another important term is what is called a contrapuntal reading, which is introduced by Edward Said. Contrapuntal reading. CONTRAPUNTAL, contrapuntal reading. Okay. What is it? Is introduced by Edward Said. The contrapuntal reading is a way of reading the text. That is, reading the text of English literature to reveal their deep implication in imperialism. So this is what is called a contrapuntal reading. Reading of texts to reveal their deep implication in imperialism. So that is what's called a contrapuntal reading. A reading of texts in English literature to reveal their deep implication in imperialism. So that means even in obviously innocent text we can see imperialist implications. So a very good example is the poem, the nursery rhyme. Ba ba black sheep, have you any wool? Yes sir, 3 bags full. One for my master, one for the dame, and one for the boy who lives down the lane. So this is a very innocent nursery rhyme. But is it that much innocent? Ba ba black sheep. Why black sheep? Why can't it be white sheep? Ba ba black sheep. Black sheep is definitely the non-white, non-European. Can it be so? Ba ba black sheep. Have you any wool? Have you any wool? So that means if we consider the black sheep as the colonized subject, and then what is the wool? What does it stand for? The wool here stands for colonial products. Colonial products. Colonial products. And then see how the sheep addresses the speaker. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is sir. In the same way as the colonial subject addresses the colonizer. Then 3 bags full. 3 bags full. One for my master, one for the boy. And we can understand these two persons. One for my master means the person who owns him. Then the boy may be the shepherd who looks after the sheep. Then who is the dame? One for the master, one for the dame, and one for the boy who lives down the lane. Who is the dame here? The dame is obviously none other than Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria. Because during her reign, 1/3 of the colonial product was levied as tax to the crown. As tax to the crown. So one for the dame means one portion for the queen as colonial tax to the crown. So thus, even an innocent nursery rhyme, we can see this kind of imperialist implication. Reading in this way, reading text in this way is what is called a contrapuntal reading. Okay. Now, I think we shall stop here now. And if you have any doubts, we can discuss now. And in the next class, we shall take Orientalism, the introduction to Orientalism. And again, the thing is that I am not getting any response from you. I don't know whether you are there, or I don't know whether you have been listening to me. And whatever it is, just let me know. Okay, if you have any doubts, you can discuss. You can ask me now. Just write it on the box. Okay, since I am not getting any response from you, I am actually winding up the session. Okay, have a nice day.